Hercule Poirot and Murder at the Twilight Masquerade. Chapter 1. The invitation in gold. Hercule Poirot sat in his impeccably ordered London flat, the late afternoon sun casting golden streaks across his polished mahogany desk. The air carried the faint aroma of his tisane, a ritual he cherished for its calming precision. His fingers, delicate yet purposeful, traced the edge of an envelope that had arrived that morning. It was no ordinary missive. The paper was thick, cream-coloured, with a texture that spoke of wealth, and embossed in gold was an invitation to the Twilight Masquerade, a grand ball hosted by Lord Reginald Ashbourne at his estate, Ashbourne Hall, in the heart of the English countryside. Poirot's grey eyes, sharp as ever, studied the invitation with curiosity. The calligraphy was elegant, almost ostentatious, yet there was something peculiar about its tone. "Your presence is requested," it read, "to partake in an evening of mystery and revelry, where all shall wear masks and secrets may be unveiled." The word secrets lingered in Poirot's mind. It was an odd choice, suggestive of more than mere festivity. He tapped the envelope lightly, his mind already turning over possibilities. Who was Lord Ashbourne, and why had he, Hercule Poirot, been summoned to this enigmatic affair? His friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, had heard whispers of Ashbourne Hall, a sprawling estate shrouded in rumours of family scandals and unexplained tragedies. They say Lord Ashbourne's father lost a fortune in some shady venture, Hastings had remarked over lunch, his voice tinged with excitement. "And there's talk of a curse, Poirot. Something about a missing heirloom. You don't believe in such nonsense, do you?" Poirot had merely smiled, his moustache twitching. "Mon ami," he had replied, "it is not curses that interest me, but the minds that create them." Now, as Poirot prepared for the journey, he felt a familiar stir of anticipation. A masquerade, with its hidden identities and veiled intentions, was precisely the sort of puzzle that appealed to his little grey cells. He packed meticulously, selecting a tailored suit and a simple black mask, elegant yet unobtrusive. The train to Ashbourne Hall departed that evening, and Poirot, ever punctual, arrived at the station with time to spare. The journey through the rolling hills of England was serene, the countryside bathed in the soft hues of twilight. Yet, as the train neared its destination, the landscape grew wilder, the trees denser, and the air carried a chill that seemed to whisper of secrets. Ashbourne Hall loomed into view as Poirot's carriage wound up a gravel path, an imposing structure of grey stone, its towers piercing the sky like silent sentinels. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows glowed with the flicker of chandeliers, promising opulence within. At the entrance, Poirot was greeted by a liveried footman, his face half hidden by a silver mask. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot," the man said, his voice low and formal. Poirot noted the slight tremor in his tone. Nervousness, perhaps? The footman led him through a grand foyer, where marble floors gleamed and portraits of stern-faced Ashbournes stared down. The air was thick with the scent of roses and wax, and the distant strains of a string quartet drifted from the ballroom. Lord Reginald Ashbourne awaited his guests in the grand hall, a tall man with sharp features and a forced smile. His mask, adorned with peacock feathers, did little to conceal the strain in his eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand, "your reputation precedes you. I trust you'll find the evening illuminating." Poirot bowed, noting the man's choice of words. Illuminating indeed. Was there something Lord Ashbourne wished him to uncover? The hall was a spectacle of decadence. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across the room, illuminating guests in extravagant costumes. Velvet cloaks, silk gowns, and masks adorned with jewels or feathers. A woman in a crimson gown glided past, her eyes glinting behind a lace. A mask. A young man in a military-style uniform stood stiffly by a column, his gaze darting nervously. An elderly lady, her mask encrusted with pearls, whispered to a companion, her words too soft for Poirot to catch. Each guest, he observed, seemed to carry an air of secrecy, as if the masks concealed more than their faces. Poirot moved through the crowd, his small stature belying the sharpness of his attention. He noted a heated exchange between a young heiress, identifiable by her diamond tiara, and a man in a black cape whose voice carried a foreign accent. A footman, different from the one who greeted him, lingered near a doorway, his posture too rigid for a mere servant, and Lord Ashbourne, circling the room, seemed to avoid certain guests, his smile faltering when he thought no one watched. As the quartet struck up a waltz, Poirot retreated to a corner, sipping a glass of champagne. His mind catalogued details, the uneven hem of a guest's cloak, suggesting haste, the faint scent of tobacco on a woman who claimed not to smoke, the way Lord Ashbourne's hand trembled when he greeted a man in a golden mask. These were the threads of a tapestry, and Poirot knew that somewhere among them lay the pattern of a crime yet to unfold. The evening was young, the masks still in place, but Poirot's instincts told him that Ashbourne Hall was a stage set for more than revelry. The invitation had promised secrets, and secrets, in Poirot's experience, often led to danger. He adjusted his mask, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. Whatever mystery awaited at the Twilight Masquerade, Hercule Poirot was ready to unravel it. Chapter 2. Masks of Motive. The grand ballroom of Ashbourne Hall shimmered under the glow of a dozen chandeliers, their crystal facets scattering light across the masked revellers like stars in a twilight sky. Hercule Poirot stood near a gilded pillar, his small frame unobtrusive, yet his presence commanding, as he observed the swirling mass of guests at the Twilight Masquerade. The air was alive, with the strains of a Viennese waltz, the rustle of silk gowns and the murmur of voices, some gay, others guarded. To Poirot, the masks that concealed faces did little to hide the motives that danced beneath. He sipped his champagne, the bubbles sharp against his palate, and let his grey eyes roam. The guests, cloaked in elaborate costumes, were a study in contrasts. A gentleman in a Venetian harlequin mask laughed too loudly, his gloved hand clutching a glass that trembled slightly. A lady in a sapphire blue gown, her mask adorned with peacock feathers, moved with a grace that suggested confidence, yet her eyes darted nervously toward the ballroom's arched doorways. Poirot noted these details with the precision of a watchmaker, each tick of behaviour a clue to the machinery of human intent. Lord Reginald Ashbourne, their host, circulated among the crowd, his peacock-feathered mask a beacon of ostentation. Yet Poirot observed a strain in his posture, a tightness in his smile, as he greeted a tall man in a golden lion mask. The man's voice, low and clipped, carried an edge of familiarity that Ashbourne seemed eager to avoid. A debt unpaid, perhaps? Poirot mused, his moustache twitching. He made a mental note to inquire further about their connection. Nearby, a young heiress, Miss Clara Winthrop, identifiable by the diamond tiara glittering atop her auburn curls, stood in heated conversation with a brooding figure in a black cape. The man's mask, plain save for a silver crescent moon, did little to conceal his intensity. "You promised me discretion, Clara," he hissed, his voice barely audible over the music. Miss Winthrop's reply was sharp, her gloved hand gesturing dismissively. "And you promised me loyalty, Victor. We're even." Poirot's ears, attuned to such exchanges, caught the names and the venom in their tones. A lover's quarrel, or something deeper? He moved closer, feigning interest in a nearby tray of canapés, and overheard Miss Winthrop mutter, "If Reginald knew, it would ruin us both." The words hung in the air like smoke, curling around Poirot's thoughts. What secret bound this young woman to their host? And why did her companion, this Victor, seem so desperate to keep it hidden? A sudden movement drew Poirot's attention to a footman stationed near a velvet-curtained alcove. Unlike the other servants, whose masks were uniform silver, this one wore a black domino mask that seemed out of place. His posture was rigid, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, and his eyes followed Lord Ashbourne with an intensity that bordered on predatory. Poirot frowned. A servant should be unobtrusive, yet this man was anything but. Was he merely observant, or did he have a purpose beyond serving wine? The music shifted to a livelier tempo, and the guests paired off for a quadrille. Poirot declined, an invitation to dance from an elderly dowager in a pearl-encrusted mask, citing a preference for observation over exertion. "The dance of human nature, madame," he said with a bow, "is far more intricate than any quadrille." She laughed, but her eyes lingered on him, as if assessing whether he, too, hid secrets beneath his simple black mask. As the dancers swirled, Poirot's gaze fell on a woman in a crimson gown, her lace mask revealing only the curve of her lips and the intensity of her gaze. She stood alone by a marble statue, her posture regal yet isolated. Earlier, he had seen her exchange a glance with Lord Ashbourne, a glance that carried weight, as if words unspoken passed between them. Now, she watched the dancers with a detachment that intrigued Poirot. Was she a guest of significance, or a player in a game yet to be revealed? He approached, offering a polite nod. "Madam, the evening is splendid, is it not? Yet you seem apart from the revelry." Her lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes remained guarded. "Some masks are heavier than others, monsieur," she replied, her voice low and melodic. Before Poirot could probe further, she glided away, her crimson skirts whispering against the polished floor. He made a note of her accent, English, yet with a hint of something continental. A woman of mystery indeed. The hour grew late, and the ballroom's energy shifted. Laughter became strained, glances more furtive. Poirot sensed a current of unease beneath the festivities, as if the guests knew something he did not. He recalled the invitation's promise of secrets unveiled, and wondered if Lord Ashbourne had orchestrated this gathering for reasons beyond celebration. Was it a trap, a test, or a stage for some darker purpose? As he pondered, a commotion arose near the French doors leading to the rose garden. A woman's gasp, followed by a man's sharp exclamation, drew the crowd's attention. Poirot moved swiftly, his small frame weaving through the throng. He reached the doors in time to see a figure, a man perhaps cloaked in shadow, slip into the night. The guests murmured, some dismissing it as a drunken stumble, but Poirot's instinct told him otherwise. The air outside carried a chill, and the scent of roses was tinged with something metallic. He returned to the ballroom, his mind cataloguing the evening's observations, Miss Winthrop's cryptic argument, the footman's watchful gaze, the crimson, Lady's guarded words, and Lord Ashbourne's nervous demeanour. Each was a thread in a tapestry of motive, and Poirot knew that somewhere among them lay the key to a mystery not yet fully revealed. The Twilight Masquerade, he sensed, was only beginning to unveil its secrets. Chapter 3. The midnight waltzy, ballroom of Ashbourne Hall, pulsed with the rhythm of a grand waltz, the strains of violins weaving through the air like a spell. It was precisely midnight, and the Twilight Masquerade had reached its zenith. Masked figures spun across the polished marble floor, their costumes a kaleidoscope of velvet, silk, and glittering jewels. Hercule Poirot stood near the edge of the dance, his black mask unobtrusive, his grey eyes missing nothing. The opulence of the scene was undeniable, yet beneath the music and laughter he sensed a discord, a note of tension that waited to break. Lord Reginald Ashbourne, resplendent in his peacock-feathered mask, led the waltz with the lady in crimson, her lace mask catching the chandelier's light. Their movements were graceful, but Poirot noted the stiffness in Ashbourne's shoulders, the way his eyes flicked toward the French doors leading to the rose garden. Across the room, Miss Clara Winthrop twirled with the brooding Victor, their steps precise, but their faces taut with unspoken words. The footman in the black domino mask, whom Poirot had observed earlier, lingered near a silver tray, his gaze fixed on the dancers with an intensity that belied his role. As the waltz reached its crescendo, a piercing scream shattered the harmony. The music faltered, violins screeching to a halt as guests froze mid-step. The cry had come from the direction of the rose garden, its echo sharp and chilling. Poirot moved swiftly, his small frame weaving through the stunned crowd toward the open French doors. Behind him, murmurs of confusion rose, punctuated by a woman's sob and a man's sharp command to stay back. Outside, the night air was cool, heavy with the scent of roses and dew. The garden was a maze of manicured hedges and blooming flowers, illuminated faintly by lanterns strung along the paths. Poirot's eyes adjusted to the dimness, and he followed the sound of gasps to a secluded alcove where a small crowd had gathered. At its centre lay a figure, crumpled on the gravel path, a jewelled dagger protruding from their chest. The victim was a man, his golden lion mask askew, revealing the pale, lifeless face of Sir Edmund Carlyle, a financier known for his ruthless business dealings. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. The dagger was ornate, its handle encrusted with emeralds, suggesting it was no ordinary weapon. Blood stained Sir Edmund's white shirt, pooling beneath him, and his eyes stared blankly at the starless sky. Poirot's mind catalogued details: the angle of the blade, suggesting a downward strike, the absence of defensive wounds, implying surprise, and a single rose petal crushed beneath the body, its edges tinged with blood. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Guests pressed forward, their masks lending an eerie anonymity to their horror. Miss Winthrop clutched Victor's arm, her tiara glinting as she whispered, "It can't be him." The lady in crimson stood apart, her hands trembling as she stared at the body. Lord Ashbourne appeared at Poirot's side, his face ashen beneath, his mask. "Monsieur Poirot, what has happened here?" he stammered, his voice betraying more than grief. Poirot rose, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "A murder, Lord Ashbourne," he said calmly. and one committed with precision. We must secure the scene and summon the authorities, but first I must observe." He turned to the footman in the black domino mask, who had followed the crowd outside. "You, monsieur, fetch a sheet to cover the body, and ensure no one leaves the estate." The footman nodded, but Poirot noted a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. As the guests were ushered back to the ballroom, Poirot examined the surroundings. The gravel path showed no clear footprints, but a broken twig on a nearby hedge suggested someone had passed in haste. A faint scent of tobacco lingered, though Sir Edmund's hands bore no trace of it. Poirot's mind turned to the timing. Midnight, the height of the waltz, when all eyes were on the dancers. The killer had chosen their moment with care, exploiting the distraction of the music and the anonymity of the masks. Inside, the ballroom had transformed from a place of revelry to one of fear. Guests whispered in clusters, their masks now seeming sinister rather than festive. Poirot overheard fragments of conversation. Carlyle had enemies from a man in a harlequin mask. He was here to settle a debt. From the elderly dowager with pearl-encrusted mask, Miss Winthrop, pale and shaken, avoided Poirot's gaze, while Victor's hand rested protectively or possessively on her shoulder. Poirot approached Lord Ashbourne, who stood by a fireplace, his hands clasped tightly. "Sir Edmund was your guest, monsieur," Poirot said softly. "What can you tell me of his purpose here?" Ashbourne's eyes darted away. "He was an old friend, a business associate. His presence was merely social." Poirot's moustache twitched. The lie was subtle, but it was there, in the quiver of Ashbourne's voice. Returning to the garden, Poirot studied the dagger once more before it was covered. Its craftsmanship suggested it belonged to the estate, perhaps from a display in the hall. Had the killer chosen it for its symbolism, or was it a weapon of opportunity? He noted a faint scratch on the handle, as if it had been forcibly removed from a mount. These were the threads of the puzzle, and Poirot's little grey cells were already weaving them together. As the local constable arrived, summoned by a servant, Poirot retreated to a quiet corner of the garden, his mind racing. Sir Edmund's death was no random act. It was a statement, bold and deliberate. The masquerade, with its hidden faces and veiled motives, had provided the perfect stage. But Poirot knew that even the cleverest killer left traces, and he would find them. The night was far from over, and the Twilight Masquerade had revealed its first deadly secret. Chapter 4. Shadows on the Balcony. The rose garden of Ashbourne Hall lay shrouded in the chill of the midnight air, the lanterns casting long, wavering shadows across the gravel path where Sir Edmund Carlyle's body had been found. Hercule Poirot stood just beyond the alcove, his black mask still in place, though it felt superfluous now that death had stripped away the evening's pretence. The constable, a stout man named Inspector Japp, had arrived and was overseeing the removal of the body, but Poirot's attention was elsewhere, on the witnesses, the estate's hidden corners, and the fleeting figure he had glimpsed slipping into the night. The guests had been herded back to the ballroom, their masks now a mockery of the festivity that had ended with a scream. Poirot, however, lingered outside, his keen eyes scanning the garden's perimeter. The French doors from the ballroom opened onto a stone terrace, flanked by balustrades and overlooked by a series of balconies that jutted from the upper floors of Ashbourne Hall. These balconies, draped in ivy, intrigued him. A killer fleeing. The scene might have used one as an escape route, unseen by the dancers within. Poirot approached Inspector Japp, who was scribbling notes with a furrowed brow. "Monsieur Japp," Poirot said, his voice calm but insistent. "We must question those who were near the garden at the time of the scream, and we must examine the balconies above. The shadow I saw, it moved with purpose." Japp nodded, accustomed to Poirot's unerring instincts. "Right, Poirot. I'll round up the witnesses. But this place, too many nooks and crannies for my liking." The first to be questioned was Miss Clara Winthrop, whose diamond tiara gleamed even in the dim lantern light. She stood on the terrace, her gloved hands clasped tightly, her face pale beneath her mask. "I was dancing with Victor," she said, her voice trembling. "I heard the scream and ran to the doors. I saw a figure, dark, moving towards the hedges." Poirot tilted his head, noting the hesitation in her words. "A figure, mademoiselle? Tall or short? Cloaked or not?" Clara's eyes flickered. "It was too dark. I couldn't tell." Poirot's moustache twitched. Her vagueness was deliberate, he suspected. Next came Victor, the brooding man in the black cape with the crescent moon mask. His account was similar, but laced with defiance. "I was with Clara, as she said. I saw nothing but shadows. You're wasting time, Monsieur Poirot." His tone was sharp, but Poirot caught a glance. He shot toward the ballroom, where Lord Ashbourne stood watching. A connection, perhaps, or a shared secret. The lady in crimson was more elusive. When summoned, she appeared on the terrace with a grace that belied the evening's horror. "I was near the statue of Apollo," she said, her voice low and melodic. "I heard the scream and looked out, but I saw no one." Poirot studied her, noting the faint tremor in her fingers. "And before the scream, madam, did you see Sir Edmund in the garden?" Her lips parted, then closed. "No," she said finally. "I was distracted." Poirot made a mental note. Distraction or deception. With Japp's permission, Poirot ascended to the first-floor balcony overlooking the rose garden. The stone was cold beneath his polished shoes, and the ivy rustled in the breeze. He examined the railing, finding a faint scuff mark, perhaps from a shoe, and a torn thread of black fabric caught in the ivy. He pocketed the thread, his mind racing. The balcony was accessible from a corridor inside, one lined with guest rooms and a servant's passage. A hidden route, perhaps, for a killer who knew the estate's secrets. Back in the ballroom, Poirot sought out Lord Ashbourne, who was conferring with a butler near a tapestry. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "Sir Edmund was a business associate, non? What ventures bound you?" Ashbourne's eyes darted away, his peacock mask glinting. "He invested in my shipping ventures," he admitted, "but they were unprofitable. He was pressing for repayment." Poirot nodded, his mind turning to financial motives. A debt unpaid could drive a man to murder. Or a woman, perhaps. The footman in the black domino mask caught Poirot's eye again. Now serving drinks with a studied nonchalance, Poirot approached, his demeanour polite but probing. "You were near the French doors, monsieur, when the scream was heard. Did you see Sir Edmund leave the ballroom?" The footman stiffened, his eyes narrowing behind the mask. "I was busy, sir. I saw nothing." Poirot smiled thinly. The man's hands, he noted, bore calluses unusual for a servant, more suited to a labourer, or perhaps a soldier. As the night wore on, Poirot pieced together fragments of the puzzle. Sir Edmund's death, with its jewelled dagger, suggested a personal vendetta, yet the financial angle loomed large. The estate's layout, with its balconies and hidden passages, offered ample opportunity for a killer to strike and vanish. The torn thread and scuff mark hinted at a planned escape. But the witnesses' conflicting accounts, Clara's vagueness, Victor's hostility, the Crimson Lady's reticence, suggested they knew more than they admitted. Poirot returned to the terrace, where Inspector Japp was questioning a gardener who claimed to have seen a cloaked figure near the hedges. The gardener's story was vague, but Poirot noted a crushed rose near the alcove, its petals matching the one found beneath Sir Edmund's body. A pattern was emerging, though its shape remained elusive. The guests, now huddled in the ballroom, cast suspicious glances at one another, their masks no longer festive but menacing. As Poirot gazed at the balconies above, he felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The Twilight Masquerade had promised secrets, and one had been unveiled in blood. But the killer, he knew, was still among them, hidden behind a mask of motive. With his little grey cells at work, Poirot resolved to unravel the truth, one shadow at a time. Chapter 5. The Lady in Crimson. The air in Ashbourne Hall had grown heavy with suspicion. The once vibrant strains of the waltz, now a distant memory, replaced by hushed whispers and the creak of polished floorboards. Hercule Poirot stood in the shadow of a marble pillar, his black mask a mere formality, as his grey eyes fixed on the Lady in Crimson. She stood near the ballroom's grand fireplace, her lace mask glinting faintly in the firelight, her posture poised yet solitary. Since the discovery of Sir Edmund Carlyle's body in the rose garden, she had drawn Poirot's attention, not for her presence, but for her absence in the moments that mattered. The guests, still reeling from the murder, clustered in anxious groups, their masks lending an eerie anonymity to their fear. Inspector Japp, ever diligent, was coordinating with servants to secure the estate. But Poirot's focus was narrower. The Lady in Crimson had claimed to see nothing, yet her trembling hands and guarded words during his earlier questioning suggested otherwise. And then there was the whisper, overheard by a maid, that she had been seen arguing with Sir Edmund near the French doors before the fatal waltz. To Poirot, such a discrepancy was a thread begging to be pulled. He approached her with the grace of a cat, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor. "Madame," he said, his voice soft but deliberate, "the evening has taken a tragic turn, non? Yet you remain a vision of calm amidst the storm." Her lips, visible beneath the lace mask, curved into a faint smile, but her eyes, dark and fathomless, betrayed a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice low with a trace of a continental accent, "calm is a habit, not a truth. I am as shaken as the others." Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching slightly. "And yet, madame, you were near the statue of Apollo when the scream was heard. A curious place to linger, so close to the garden where Sir Edmund met. His end!" Her fingers tightened around her fan, a delicate thing of ivory and silk. "I enjoy art," she said simply. "The statue drew my attention." Poirot nodded, but his mind catalogued the evasion. The statue was indeed striking, but it faced the garden path where the body was found. A vantage point, not a distraction. He pressed further, his tone polite but probing. "A maid claims you spoke with Sir Edmund before the waltz, madam." "Aimed and did. Heated exchange, perhaps?" Her smile faltered, and for a moment Poirot glimpsed something raw beneath her composure. Fear, or perhaps guilt. "The maid is mistaken," she said, her voice sharper now. "I barely knew Sir Edmund. Our paths crossed briefly, nothing more." She turned away, her crimson skirts rustling as she moved toward a table laden with crystal glasses. Poirot did not follow, but his eyes tracked her. The maid's account, though uncorroborated, was not the only clue. Earlier, he had noticed a faint mark on her glove, a smudge of green like the verdigris of aged metal. The jewelled dagger that killed Sir Edmund had an emerald-encrusted handle, its patina suggesting age. Could the smudge be a trace of the murder weapon? Poirot filed the observation away, knowing that such details, however small, often unlocked the truth. He turned his attention to the ballroom, where Lord Ashbourne was attempting to restore order, his peacock mask askew as he addressed the guests. "Please remain calm," he urged, his voice strained. "The authorities are handling everything." Poirot noted the glances exchanged among the guests. Miss Clara Winthrop, clinging to Victor's arm, the footman in the black domino mask, now polishing glasses with unnecessary vigour, and a man in a harlequin mask, who watched the Crimson Lady with an intensity that matched Poirot's own. Seeking more context, Poirot approached Miss Winthrop, whose tiara gleamed under the chandeliers. "Mademoiselle, you knew Sir Edmund. What was his connection to the lady in crimson?" Clara's eyes widened, then narrowed. "I don't know her," she stammered. "Sir Edmund mentioned a woman from his past, someone he wronged, but he never named her." Poirot's interest sharpened. A past wrong? Could it be the motive for murder? He next sought out Lord Ashbourne, who was now near the French doors, his hands trembling. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "the lady in crimson. Her name, if you please?" Ashbourne hesitated, his eyes darting to the woman in question. "She is Madame Elise Duval, a guest of an acquaintance. I know little of her." Poirot's smile was thin. Ashbourne's pause spoke volumes, suggesting a connection he was reluctant to admit. As the night deepened, Poirot retreated to a quiet alcove, his mind sifting through the clues. Madame Duval's guarded demeanour, the smudge on her glove, and her alleged argument with Sir Edmund painted her as a figure of interest. Yet her elegance and reserve suggested a woman accustomed to control, not impulsive violence. Was she the killer, or a pawn in a larger game? And what of Ashbourne's reticence? The estate itself seemed to whisper secrets, its corridors and balconies hiding paths the killer might have taken. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft clink, a glass knocked over by the footman in the black domino mask. The man's eyes met Poirot's for a fleeting moment, and Poirot sensed a challenge in them. Another thread, perhaps, in the tapestry of motive. The lady in crimson, Madame Duval, remained his focus, but he knew the truth lay in the interplay of all these figures, their masks concealing not just faces, but intentions. The Twilight Masquerade had become a stage for murder, and Poirot, with his little grey cells, was determined to unmask the killer. Madame Duval's secrets, he sensed, were a key, but whether they unlocked guilt or merely another layer of the mystery remained to be seen. Chapter 6. Whispers of a Curse. The grand ballroom of Ashbourne Hall, once a stage for elegance and revelry, now felt like a gilded cage. The guests, their masks still clinging to their faces, whispered in tight knots, their voices a low hum of fear and suspicion. Hercule Poirot stood by a towering window, the midnight moon casting a silver glow across his polished shoes. The murder of Sir Edmund Carlyle in the Rose Garden had shattered the Twilight Masquerade's facade. And now a new thread had emerged from the murmurs, a tale of a curse that clung to the Ashbourne family like ivy to the estate's ancient walls. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, sifting through the clues gathered thus far. The jewelled dagger, the smudge of verdigris on Madame Elise Duval's glove, the conflicting accounts of witnesses, and the shadowy figure seen fleeing the garden. Yet it was the whispers of a curse overheard among the guests that now piqued his curiosity. "They say the Ashbournes are doomed," a woman in a pearl-encrusted mask had murmured to her companion. "A betrayal long ago, and death follows. Those who meddle," Poirot, ever sceptical of the supernatural, saw in these tales not a curse, but a motive, a human hand cloaked in legend. He sought out the source of the rumours, guided by a servant to an elderly man seated in a velvet armchair near the library's entrance. The man, introduced as Professor Archibald Wren, was an eccentric historian whose owl-like mask and tattered tweed coat set him apart from the opulent crowd. His eyes gleamed with a mix of mischief and knowledge as he greeted Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, the great detective, I've read of your exploits. What brings you to an old scholar like me on such a grim night?" Poirot bowed slightly, his moustache twitching. "Monsieur Wren, I hear whispers of a curse upon the Ashbourne family. You, a historian, must know its origins. Tell me, what truth lies behind these tales?" Wren leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The Ashbourne curse, as they call it, began a century ago with Lord Cornelius Ashbourne, Reginald's great-grandfather. He betrayed a trusted friend over a priceless heirloom, a sapphire diadem said to hold mystical power. The friend, ruined, cursed the family, vowing that death would follow any who sought the diadem's secrets." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this diadem, monsieur, it is lost?" Wren nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of his mask. "Vanished. Some say stolen, others say hidden within these very walls. Cornelius died mysteriously soon after, and the family's fortunes dwindled. Sir Edmund Carlyle, I hear, was obsessed with antiquities. Perhaps he sought the diadem, stirring old wounds." Poirot's mind seized on this, a lost heirloom, a financial motive tied to Sir Edmund's investments in Ashbourne's ventures. Could the curse be a cover for a more tangible crime? He pressed Wren further. "Who else among the guests knows of this curse?" The historian's gaze flickered toward the ballroom, where Lord Ashbourne stood, his peacock mask glinting as he spoke with Madame Duval. "Reginald, of course, though he dismisses it as nonsense. And that young heiress, Clara Winthrop. She asked me about the diadem last week, all nervous curiosity. As for the lady in crimson, she's a mystery. But I saw her studying an old portrait of Cornelius earlier. She seemed haunted." Poirot thanked Wren and moved toward the portrait gallery, a dimly lit corridor lined with stern-faced Ashbournes. The painting of Cornelius, a dour man with piercing eyes, hung above a marble console. Poirot examined it closely, noting a faint outline in the background. A diadem, perhaps, subtly etched into the canvas. Dust on the frame suggested it had been recently touched, and a single crimson thread, caught in a splinter, confirmed Madame Duval's presence. Another thread in the tapestry, Poirot thought. But was it a clue or a distraction? Returning to the ballroom, Poirot observed the guests anew. Miss Winthrop, her tiara askew, whispered urgently to Victor, whose crescent moon mask seemed to mock his grim expression. The footman in the black domino mask moved among the crowd, his calloused hands betraying his disguise, and Madame Duval, ever elusive, stood by a tapestry, her eyes meeting Poirot's for a fleeting moment before she turned away. The curse, Poirot mused, was a convenient story, but human greed and betrayal were far more potent forces. He approached. Lord Ashbourne, who was visibly shaken, his hands fidgeting with a glass of brandy. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "this curse, do you believe it influenced Sir Edmund's fate?" Ashbourne laughed, a hollow sound. "Superstition, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Edmund was here for business, not fairy tales. He pressed me for funds, and nothing more." Yet his eyes betrayed fear, and Poirot noted a tremor in his voice, as if the curse's shadow lingered in his mind. As the night wore on, Poirot retreated to a quiet corner, his thoughts swirling. The curse, whether real or fabricated, pointed to a motive rooted in the past, a lost heirloom, a betrayed trust, a family's ruin. Sir Edmund's obsession with antiquities, Clara's curiosity, Madame Duval's cryptic behaviour, and Ashbourne's evasions all wove together, but the pattern was incomplete. The footman's watchful presence added another layer, suggesting a player yet to be unmasked. The estate itself seemed to breathe secrets, its walls hiding passages, and its history cloaking truths. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, passing the historian's tale, the crimson thread, and the whispers of doom. The Twilight Masquerade, he knew, was no mere ball. It was a stage where past and present collided, and the killer had used its shadows to strike. With each clue, Poirot drew closer to the truth, but the curse's whispers lingered, a reminder that some secrets were deadly. Chapter 7. The Locked Study. The corridors of Ashbourne Hall seemed to pulse with secrets, their shadowed walls whispering of past betrayals as Hercule Poirot navigated their labyrinthine turns. The murder of Sir Edmund Carlyle in the Rose Garden had cast a pall over the Twilight Masquerade, and the guests, their masks now symbols of deceit, huddled in the ballroom under Inspector Japp's watchful eye. Poirot, however, was drawn to a quieter corner of the estate, a locked door at the end of a dimly lit passage, rumoured to lead to Lord Reginald Ashbourne's private study. To Poirot, a locked door was not a barrier, but an invitation, and his little grey cells were eager to accept. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever loyal, accompanied him, his face flushed with a mix of excitement and unease. "I say, Poirot," Hastings whispered, glancing at the heavy oak door, its brass knob gleaming faintly in the lamplight. "Do you think Ashbourne's hiding something in there? Papers, perhaps, or that cursed diadem old Wren was on about?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mon ami, what is hidden is always revealed to those who observe. But first, we must gain entry." The door was secured with a sturdy lock, but Poirot, with his knack for improvisation, produced a small tool, a relic from a past case, and set to work. The lock yielded with a soft click, and the door creaked open to reveal a study steeped in shadow. The air was thick with the scent of leather and old paper, and a single window overlooked the rose garden where Sir Edmund had met his end. A mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with ledgers, a silver inkstand, and a locked drawer that piqued Poirot's interest. He motioned for Hastings to close the door, then began his examination. The ledgers detailed Ashbourne's shipping ventures, confirming Sir Edmund's investment and his demands for repayment. But it was the locked drawer that held Poirot's attention. With deft fingers he coaxed it open, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon. The topmost letter, penned in a sharp, angular script, read, "Pay what you owe, or the truth of your father's dealings will be known." Blackmail, Poirot thought, his eyes narrowing. Sir Edmund, it seemed, had wielded more than financial pressure. Among the letters was a folded document, a will dated a year prior, naming a beneficiary Poirot did not recognize, a woman named Eleanor Duval. The name struck a chord. Could she be Madame Elise Duval, the lady in crimson? The will hinted at a significant inheritance, tied to an estate separate from Ashbourne Hall. Poirot's mind raced. If Sir Edmund had known of this will, his murder might have been a desperate act to protect, or claim, a fortune. Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, gasped, "Good heavens, Poirot! Blackmail and a secret will! This could ruin Ashbourne." Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to a small notebook tucked beneath the letters. Its pages were filled with cryptic notations, dates, initials, and sums of money. One entry, dated a week prior, read, "E.D. demands proof. Diadem." The reference to the diadem, the cursed heirloom Professor Wren had described, sent a chill through Poirot. Was it a mere artifact, or the key to the murder? Their discovery was interrupted by a sudden crash from the corridor, a heavy vase shattering on the marble floor. Poirot and Hastings rushed out to find Miss Clara Winthrop, her tiara askew, clutching her arm as a footman, the one in the black domino mask, helped her to her feet. "It fell from the table," she stammered, her eyes wide with fear. "I was walking, and it just fell." Poirot's gaze darted to the table, its edge too high for an accidental topple. The vase, he noted, was heavy enough to have caused serious harm. An accident, or a warning? He questioned Clara gently, his tone soothing, but his eyes sharp. "Mademoiselle, you were near the study. Were you seeking something?" Her cheeks flushed. I couldn't sleep. I was exploring, that's all." Her glance toward the study door betrayed her, and Poirot suspected she knew of its contents. Had she been after the will, or something else? The footman lingered, his calloused hands steady as he swept up the shards. Poirot studied him, noting a faint scar on his wrist, visible as his sleeve shifted. A soldier, perhaps, or a man accustomed to rougher work than serving wine. "You are most attentive, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice laced with irony. The footman met his gaze, unflinching, and murmured, "Just doing my duty, sir." They returned to the ballroom. Poirot's mind wove the new clues into the tapestry of the case. The blackmail letters pointed to Sir Edmund's leverage over Ashbourne, while the will suggested a motive tied to inheritance, and possibly Madame Duval. The diadem, whether real or myth, loomed as a symbol of greed, and Clara's accident hinted at a killer still active, watching from the shadows. The footman's presence, too, was no coincidence. His vigilance suggested a role beyond servitude. The estate's corridors, with their hidden passages and locked doors, mirrored the complexity of the mystery. Poirot paused by a window. The moonlit garden below, a stark reminder of Sir Edmund's fate. The Twilight Masquerade had unveiled its first victim, but the killer, he knew, was still among them, their motives locked away like the study's secrets. With each discovery, Poirot drew closer to the truth, but the danger was far from over. Chapter 8. The Masked Impostor. The air in Ashbourne Hall was thick with suspicion. The once gleaming chandeliers now casting a pallid glow over the guests, whose masks seemed to mock the truth they concealed. Hercule Poirot stood near a velvet-draped window, his small frame silhouetted against the moonlit night, his grey eyes scanning the ballroom with the precision of a jeweller examining a flawed gem. The murder of Sir Edmund Carlyle, the blackmail letters, and the hidden will found in Lord Ashbourne's locked study had woven a complex tapestry of motives. But a new thread had emerged, a whisper that one guessed was not who they claimed to be. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with the implications of this discovery. Earlier, while examining the guest list with Inspector Japp, he had noticed an anomaly. An invitation addressed to a certain Mr. Charles Langley, a minor noble, bore a different wax seal from the others, its edges slightly irregular, as if tampered with. The man claiming to be Langley, a tall figure in a golden lion mask, the same style Sir Edmund had worn, stood now by a marble column, his posture too stiff for the aristocrat he purported to be. Poirot's instincts told him this was no mere clerical error. He approached Captain Hastings, who was nursing a brandy and looking thoroughly out of his depth. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low, "this Langley, he intrigues me. Observe, his hands, they are not those of a gentleman, but of one accustomed to labour, and his accent, it wavers none." Hastings frowned, squinting at the man. "By Jove, Poirot, you're right." He stumbled over his words when Ashbourne introduced him. "Do you think he's the killer?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Not so fast, Hastings. An impostor, yes, but a murderer. That remains to be seen." He decided to test his theory through interrogation, a method he wielded with the finesse of a fencer. He approached Langley, who was conversing with Miss Clara Winthrop, her diamond tiara glinting as she laughed nervously. "Monsieur Langley," Poirot began, his tone polite but piercing, "your presence adds such, and then means, distinction to the evening. Tell me, how did you come to know Lord Ashbourne?" The man's eyes, visible through the lion mask, flickered with unease. "We met at a charity event in London," he said, his voice clipped. "He invited me personally." Poirot nodded, noting the hesitation. "Curious, monsieur, for Lord Ashbourne claims you were recommended by a mutual friend. Who might that be?" Langley's hand tightened around his glass, and a bead of sweat glistened at his temple. "A Mr. Harrow, I believe. I forget the details." Poirot's smile was thin. No such Harrow appeared on the guest list, and Langley's lie was as transparent as the crystal in his hand. He turned to Clara, who had gone pale. "Mademoiselle, you seem well acquainted with Monsieur Langley. Did you know him before tonight?" Her eyes darted to Langley, then away. "Only in passing," she murmured. "We spoke at a ball last season." Poirot's mind catalogued her unease, suspecting she knew more of Langley's deception than she admitted. Had she too been drawn into a scheme? Poirot's next move was to confront Lord Ashbourne, who stood near the fireplace, his peacock mask askew as he whispered with Madame Elise Duval. "Monsieur," Poirot said, drawing him aside, "this Charles Langley, his invitation, it is irregular. Do you know him well?" Ashbourne's face tightened, his fingers fidgeting with a cufflink. "He came highly recommended," he said curtly. "I trust my sources." Yet his eyes avoided Poirot's, and Poirot sensed a deeper truth. Ashbourne, too, might suspect Langley's falsehood. The investigation took a new turn when Poirot examined a discarded cloak near the French doors, left in haste during the chaos of the murder. Tucked in its pocket was a crumpled note. "Meet me at midnight. The diadem is yours if the debt is paid." The handwriting matched the blackmail, letters from the study, and the mention of the diadem linked back to Professor Wren's tale of the Ashbourne curse. Was Langley the blackmailer, posing as a guest to press Sir Edmund or Ashbourne for payment? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the ballroom's entrance. The footman in the black domino mask, ever present, had dropped a tray of glasses, his hands trembling as he met Poirot's gaze. The scar on his wrist, noticed earlier, now seemed a clue to his own hidden identity. Poirot approached, his voice soft but commanding. "Monsieur, you are most attentive, yet I wonder, do you know this Langley?" The footman's eyes narrowed. "I serve the guests, sir. I don't pry." But his tone, too sharp for a servant, betrayed him. As Poirot pieced together the puzzle, the ballroom's tension grew palpable. Clara avoided Langley, her glances nervous. Madame Duval watched the crowd with a guarded intensity, and Ashbourne's forced composure began to crack. The impostor, Poirot suspected, was tied to Sir Edmund's murder, perhaps a hired thug, a rival, or a pawn in a larger scheme. The note and the irregular invitation pointed to a planned deception, but the killer's true motive remained elusive. Poirot retreated to a quiet alcove, his mind weaving the clues: Langley's rough hands, the tampered invitation, the blackmail note, and the footman's vigilance. The Twilight Masquerade, with its masks and shadows, was the perfect stage for an impostor to strike. But who was Langley? And what did he seek? The diadem, revenge, or something more sinister? Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, knowing the truth was close, yet danger closer still. Chapter 9. The Broken Chandelier, the ballroom of Ashbourne Hall, once a beacon of opulence, now simmered with dread, the air thick with the scent of wax and fear. Hercule Poirot stood near a tapestry, his black mask a mere formality, as his grey eyes darted across the guests, their faces half hidden, but their motives laid bare to his scrutiny. The murder of Sir Edmund Carlyle, the blackmail letters, the hidden will, and the impostor posing as Charles Langley had woven a web of intrigue, and Poirot sensed the killer was poised to strike again. The Twilight Masquerade, it seemed, was far from over. The guests confined to the ballroom under Inspector Japp's orders clung to their masks as if they could shield them from the truth. Lord Ashbourne, his peacock mask askew, paced near the fireplace, his nervous glances betraying a man on the edge. Madame Elise Duval, the lady in crimson, stood by a window, her lace mask glinting as she watched the storm brewing outside, its distant thunder echoing the tension within. Miss Clara Winthrop and Victor, the brooding man in the crescent moon mask, whispered urgently, while the footman in the black domino mask moved among the crowd, his calloused hands a silent warning. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, ear-splitting groan from above, a metallic screech that froze the room. He looked up just as the massive central chandelier, a cascade of crystal and gold, swayed ominously. Before he could shout a warning, the fixture plummeted, crashing onto the marble floor with a deafening roar. Shards of crystal flew like shrapnel, and screams erupted as guests scrambled for cover. Poirot, quick as a cat, pulled Hastings behind a pillar, his heart racing but his mind sharp. The dust settled, revealing a wreckage of twisted metal and shattered glass. Miraculously, no one was killed, though a woman in a sapphire gown clutched a bleeding arm, and a man in a harlequin mask lay dazed, a crystal shard embedded in his shoulder. Poirot rushed to the scene, his eyes scanning the debris. The chandelier's chain, he noted, had been severed cleanly, not frayed, but cut as if with a blade. This was no accident. It was sabotage, a bold act by a killer growing reckless. Inspector Japp, his face flushed with urgency, barked orders to secure the area. Poirot, however, knelt among the wreckage, his gloved fingers tracing a faint mark on the chain, a nick suggesting a tool had been used. Nearby, a single black feather lay among the shards, its edges singed. Poirot pocketed it, his mind flashing to the footman's domino mask, adorned with similar feathers. A coincidence, or a clue? He turned to the guests, their masks now askew, revealing pale faces and wide eyes. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his voice steady but commanding. "This was no mere mishap. Someone among us sought to harm, perhaps to kill. I urge you to speak what you know." His gaze lingered on Madame Duval, whose hands trembled as she clutched her fan, and on Clara, who avoided his eyes. The man claiming to be Charles Langley stood rigid, his lion mask glinting, his rough hands clenched at his sides. Poirot approached Lord Ashbourne, who was visibly shaken, his cufflinks gleaming as he wrung his hands. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "this chandelier, its maintenance, who oversees it?" Ashbourne stammered, "The staff. I trust them implicitly." But his eyes darted to the footman, who was helping a servant clear the debris. Poirot noted the exchange, suspecting Ashbourne knew more than he admitted. He next questioned Clara, who stood near Victor, her tiara askew. "Mademoiselle, you were beneath the chandelier when it fell. Did you see anyone above, perhaps on the balcony?" Her voice trembled. I was distracted. I saw nothing." Victor interjected, his tone sharp. "She's been through enough, Poirot. Leave her be." But Poirot's smile was unyielding. Their defensiveness, he knew, hid a truth. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing the windows and trapping the guests within the estate. Poirot climbed to the gallery above the ballroom, where the chandelier's chain had been anchored. The sheet, floorboards bore faint scratches, and a cigarette butt, still warm, lay discarded in a corner. The tobacco scent matched that found near Sir Edmund's body, suggesting a connection. Poirot's mind raced. The killer, emboldened by their first success, was escalating, using the masquerade's chaos to strike again. He returned to the ballroom, where the guests' fear had turned to paranoia, their whispers accusing one another. Madame Duval, her composure fraying, avoided Poirot's gaze, while the footman's movements were too deliberate, his eyes too watchful. Langley, the impostor, lingered near a tapestry, his posture betraying a man ready to flee. Poirot's little grey cells wove the clues together: the cut chain, the black feather, the cigarette butt, and the impostor's presence. The killer was among them, their mask not just of fabric, but of motive. As the storm raged, Poirot stood by the wrecked chandelier, its crystals glinting like broken promises. The Twilight Masquerade had become a deadly game, and the killer's audacity was a challenge Poirot could not ignore. With each clue, he drew closer to unmasking the truth, but the danger, he knew, was far from over. Chapter 10. Secrets in the Library. The storm outside Ashbourne Hall raged with unrelenting fury, its howling winds rattling the windows and casting erratic shadows across the ballroom's shattered remnants. The chandelier's wreckage, a twisted heap of crystal and metal, lay cordoned off, a stark reminder of the killer's audacity. Hercule Poirot, his black mask now tucked into his pocket, felt the weight of the Twilight Masquerade's secrets pressing upon him. The murder of Sir Edmund Carlyle, the blackmail letters, the hidden will, and the impostor posing as Charles Langley had woven a complex tapestry. But Poirot sensed the truth lay in quieter corners of the estate. He sought refuge in the library, a sanctuary of leather-bound tomes and flickering lamplight, hoping its silence would yield answers. Captain Hastings trailed behind, his face etched with worry. "I say, Poirot, this place gives me the creeps. First a murder, then that chandelier nearly kills us all. What's next?" Poirot's moustache twitched as he surveyed the library's towering shelves, their dark wood gleaming under the glow of a single chandelier, mercifully intact. "Mon ami," he replied, "the library is where secrets whisper, and I intend to listen." The room was vast, its air heavy with the scent of aged paper and wax. A long oak table dominated the centre, strewn with maps and manuscripts, while a marble bust of Aristotle gazed down from a pedestal. Poirot's eyes, however, were drawn to a bookcase near the fireplace, its carvings intricate and slightly misaligned. He ran his fingers along the edge, detecting a faint seam. A hidden compartment, perhaps. With a gentle push, a panel clicked open, revealing a small cavity containing a bundle of letters tied with a crimson ribbon and a faded photograph. Poirot's heart quickened as he untied the ribbon. The letters, penned in a flowing script, were love letters, their tone ardent yet tinged with desperation. "My dearest," one began, "our secret must remain buried lest it destroy us both." The signature was simply E.D. Eleanor Duval, Poirot suspected, linking back to the will found in the locked study. The letters spoke of a forbidden romance, thwarted by family duty and a betrayal tied to the Ashbourne estate. One passage caught Poirot's eye. "He knows, and he will use it against us. The diadem is his price." The photograph was more revealing. A young woman, strikingly similar to Madame Elise Duval, stood beside a man whose features resembled Sir Edmund Carlyle in his youth. They were in a garden, her hand resting on his arm, a sapphire diadem glinting in her hair. Poirot's little grey cells raced. Could this be the cursed diadem Professor Wren had described? And was Madame Duval the woman in the photograph, her past entwined with Sir Edmund's? Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, gasped, "Good Lord, Poirot, a love affair! And that diadem, do you think it's real?" Poirot nodded, his mind weaving connections. "The diadem, mon ami, is a symbol, but the emotions it represents, love, betrayal, greed, are very real. Sir Edmund's murder may stem from this romance, or the secrets it concealed." Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft creak from the library door. Madame Duval stood there, her crimson gown a vivid contrast to the room's muted tones, her lace mask unable to hide the alarm in her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but strained, "you are persistent. What do you seek here?" Poirot held up the photograph, watching her closely. "Madame, this image, does it hold meaning for you?" Her lips parted, then closed, and for a moment Poirot saw a flicker of pain. "A memory," she murmured, "from a lifetime ago." He pressed further, his tone gentle but unyielding. "And these letters signed E.D. They speak of a love betrayed, and a man who knew too much. Was that man Sir Edmund?" Her hands clenched and she turned away, her voice barely audible. "You see too much, monsieur, but some secrets are better left buried." She swept out, leaving Poirot with more questions than answers. He returned to the letters, noting a coded reference in one. "Meet at the Rose Garden, midnight, where the truth lies." The timing and location matched. Sir Edmund's murder, suggesting the killer had exploited a planned rendezvous. Was Madame Duval the betrayed lover, seeking revenge, or a victim of Sir Edmund's schemes? And what of the impostor, Langley, whose rough hands and tampered invitation hinted at a deeper role? As Poirot and Hastings left the library, a commotion erupted in the ballroom. Miss Clara Winthrop, her tiara glinting, was arguing with Victor, their voices sharp. "You knew about the letters," she hissed, unaware of Poirot's approach. Victor's crescent moon mask hid his expression, but his tone was defensive. "I was protecting you, Clara. He would have ruined us." Poirot's ears pricked up. Another thread. Clara and Victor, too, were entangled in the web of secrets. The storm outside raged on, trapping the guests within Ashbourne Hall's walls. Poirot stood by the library's fireplace, the letters and photograph in hand, his mind sifting through the clues. The romantic betrayal, the diadem's shadow, the impostor's presence, and the chandelier's sabotage. The killer, he knew, was growing desperate, their actions bolder with each passing hour. The Twilight Masquerade had unveiled a love story stained with blood, and Poirot was determined to uncover its final chapter. Chapter 11. The second strike, the storm-battering Ashbourne Hall, had transformed the estate into a fortress of shadows, its howling winds and lashing rain sealing the guests within a crucible of fear. The ballroom, scarred by the wreckage of the sabotaged chandelier, buzzed with the low hum of panic, the guests' masks no longer concealing their dread. Hercule Poirot, his black mask discarded, stood by a window, his grey eyes reflecting the lightning that split the sky. The murder of Sir Edmund Carlyle, the blackmail letters, the hidden will, the love letters, and the impostor posing as Charles Langley had woven a deadly tapestry. But Poirot sensed the killer was not yet done. The Twilight Masquerade, it seemed, demanded another sacrifice. Captain Hastings, ever at Poirot's side, fidgeted nervously. "This place is cursed, Poirot," he muttered, glancing at the huddled guests. "First Carlyle, then that chandelier. Someone's trying to pick us off one by one." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Not a curse, mon ami, but a mind, calculated and ruthless. We must remain vigilant." His words proved prophetic. A piercing cry echoed from the lower levels of the estate, sharp and desperate, cutting through into the storm's din. Poirot moved swiftly, his small frame belying his urgency, as he followed the sound to a stone staircase leading to the wine cellar. Inspector Japp, alerted by a servant, joined him, his face grim. "Another one, Poirot?" he asked, his voice heavy with foreboding. Poirot nodded, his little grey cells already at work. The wine cellar was a cavern of shadows, its air cool and damp, scented with oak and fermented grapes. Lanterns cast flickering light across rows of dusty bottles, revealing a crumpled figure near a rack of vintage Bordeaux. It was the footman, in the black domino mask, his calloused hands now still, a jewelled dagger, the twin of the one that killed Sir Edmund, protruding from his chest. Blood pooled on the stone floor, and his scar-marked wrist, visible beneath a torn sleeve, confirmed his identity as the watchful servant Poirot had suspected of more than servitude. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands careful. The dagger's emerald-encrusted handle gleamed, its craftsmanship identical to the first murder weapon, suggesting a deliberate pattern. The footman's face, unmasked in death, revealed a rugged man in his 30s, his eyes wide with surprise. A crumpled note clutched in his hand read, "You knew too much." Poirot's mind raced. The footman, with his soldier-like scars and vigilant demeanour, had been a player in the masquerade's deadly game. Perhaps a blackmailer, a spy, or a conspirator. Japp, inspecting the scene, shook his head. Same dagger, same method, but this one's messier. The killer's getting sloppy. Poirot disagreed silently. The strike was precise, the note a taunt. The killer was not sloppy but bold, eliminating a threat. He examined the cellar, noting a scuff mark on the floor and a faint trace of crimson fabric caught on a splintered barrel. Madame Elise Duval's gown flashed in his mind, but he cautioned himself against haste. The guests, summoned to the cellar's entrance, gasped at the sight. Miss Clara Winthrop, her tiara askew, clung to Victor, her face pale. "He was just a servant," she whispered, but her trembling voice betrayed fear. Victor, his crescent moon mask glinting, said nothing, his eyes fixed on the body. Lord Ashbourne, his peacock mask removed, looked ill, murmuring, "This is madness." Madame Duval, standing apart, her lace mask impassive, met Poirot's gaze briefly, before turning away. Poirot began his inquiries, his voice calm but commanding. "Monsieur Ashbourne, this footman, his name, his history." Ashbourne stammered. James Carter, hired recently, recommended by a friend." Poirot noted the vagueness, recalling the footman's calloused hands and scar. A soldier, perhaps, or a hired man with a darker purpose. He turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle, you spoke with Carter earlier. What did he say?" Clara's eyes widened. "Nothing, just pleasantries." But her glance toward Victor suggested otherwise. Poirot reconstructed the timeline. The chandelier's fall had distracted the guests, giving the killer time to lure Carter to the cellar. The note's message, "You knew too much," echoed the blackmail letters from the study, suggesting Carter had uncovered a secret tied to Sir Edmund's death. Was he an accomplice turned liability, or a witness silenced? The crimson fabric hinted at Madame Duval, but Poirot suspected a red herring, planted to mislead. He returned to the cellar, examining the surroundings. A dusty footprint, too large for Carter's boots, marked the stone near a hidden door leading to a servant's passage. The killer, Poirot deduced, had used the estate's labyrinthine layout to strike and vanish. The dagger's twin, likely taken from a display, pointed to someone familiar with Ashbourne Hall's treasures, perhaps an insider, or the impostor, Langley. The guests' paranoia surged, their whispers accusing one another. Poirot overheard a man in a harlequin mask mutter, "Carter was asking questions about the diadem." The cursed heirloom, mentioned in the love letters and Professor Wren's tale, loomed larger, its shadow tying the murders together. Poirot's mind wove the clues, the daggers, the note, the crimson fabric, and the hidden passage. The killer was among them, their mask of innocence slipping with each act. As the storm raged, Poirot stood by the cellar's entrance, the weight of 2 murders pressing upon him. The Twilight Masquerade had become a deadly dance, and the killer's steps were growing desperate. With his little grey cells at work, Poirot knew the truth was near, but so was danger. Chapter 12. The Unmasking Hour. The storm outside Ashbourne Hall had reached a fevered pitch, its relentless winds howling like the ghosts of the estate's troubled past. Inside, the ballroom was a tableau of tension, the shattered remnants of the chandelier a stark reminder of the danger lurking among the masked guests. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small frame commanding attention, his grey eyes gleaming with the clarity of a man who had unravelled a puzzle. The murders of Sir Edmund Carlyle and the footman James Carter, the blackmail letters, the hidden will, the love letters, and the impostor posing as Charles Langley had, led to this moment, the unmasking hour. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the murmurs of the gathered guests. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice steady and resonant, "the Twilight Masquerade has been a dance of deception, and 2 lives have been claimed. But the killer is among us, and it is time to remove the masks, not just of silk and feathers, but of lies." The guests, their faces half hidden, exchanged uneasy glances. Lord Ashbourne, his peacock mask discarded, stood rigid. Madame Elise Duval, in her crimson gown, clutched her lace mask tightly. Miss Clara Winthrop, her tiara glinting, leaned against Victor, whose crescent moon mask could not hide his scowl. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. Let us begin with Sir Edmund Carlyle, stabbed in the rose garden with a jewelled dagger. He was a man of wealth, but also of secrets, blackmail, debts, and a past betrayal. The dagger, taken from a display in this very hall, suggested a killer familiar with the estate. His eyes flicked to Ashbourne, whose face paled. "Monsieur Ashbourne, you owed Sir Edmund a fortune, did you not? His demands threatened your ruin." Ashbourne stammered, I had no choice but to comply." Poirot nodded. "Yet you did not kill him. Your fear, it is genuine, but your hands are clean." The guests gasped, and Poirot turned to Madame Duval. "Madame, the love letters signed E.D., Eleanor Duval, revealed a romance with Sir Edmund, ended by his betrayal. You argued with him before his death, and a smudge of verdigris on your glove matched the dagger's handle." Her eyes widened, but she remained silent. "Yet," Poirot continued, "your pain is not the rage of a murderer." He pivoted to Clara and Victor. "Mademoiselle Winthrop, You and Monsieur Victor were entangled with Sir Edmund in a scheme, a debt, a secret, perhaps tied to the diadem. Your evasions betrayed you." Clara's hand trembled, but Victor snapped, "You've no proof, Poirot." Poirot's smile was thin. "Patience, monsieur. The proof comes." Poirot's gaze settled on the man in the golden lion mask. Charles Langley, or so he claimed. "You, monsieur, are no nobleman. Your rough hands, your tampered invitation, and your lies mark you as an impostor. But more, you are James Carter's accomplice, hired to infiltrate this masquerade." The man stiffened, his mask slipping slightly. Poirot continued. "Carter, the footman, was no servant but a hired man, perhaps a former soldier, tasked with watching Sir Edmund. His death, with a second dagger, was to silence him, for he knew too much." Poirot raised the crumpled note found on Carter's body. "You knew too much." "This," he said, "was written by the killer, who orchestrated both murders. The chandelier's sabotage was a distraction, meant to sow chaos while Carter was lured to the cellar." He held up a black feather and a cigarette butt. "These, found at the scenes, point to one among us who smokes, a habit not shared by Langley, but by another." His eyes locked on Victor. "Monsieur, your crescent moon mask hides a temper, and your cigarette case bears the same brand as the butt in the gallery. You argued with Clara about ruin, and your connection to Sir Edmund was not love, but greed. You sought the diadem, believing it would settle your debts. When Sir Edmund threatened to expose you, you killed him, using the masquerade's chaos. Carter, your accomplice, became a liability, so you struck again." Victor's face twisted, his mask falling as he lunged forward. "You're mad, Poirot!" But Japp's men, positioned discreetly, restrained him. Clara sobbed, "He did it for me! Sir Edmund would have ruined us." Poirot nodded gravely. "The diadem, a myth to some, was real to you, a prize worth killing for. The love letters misled us, but the blackmail was your motive." The guests stood stunned, their masks removed, revealing faces of shock and relief. Madame Duval's eyes glistened with tears, her past with Sir Edmund a wound, not a crime. Ashbourne slumped, his secrets exposed, but his life spared. Poirot's voice softened. "The masquerade, it hides the face, but not the heart. The killer's mask is off, and justice will follow." As Victor was led away, the storm began to wane, its thunder a fading echo. The Twilight Masquerade had reached its end, and Poirot, with his little grey cells, had unravelled its deadly dance. Chapter 13. The dawn of truth, the storm that had battered Ashbourne Hall, subsided as dawn broke, its first pale rays piercing the heavy clouds and casting a soft glow across the ballroom's marred splendour. The wreckage of the chandelier lay, silent, the guests' masks discarded, their faces raw with the weight of the night's revelations. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small frame a beacon of calm amidst the chaos, his grey eyes alight with the clarity of truth. The Twilight Masquerade had claimed 2 lives, Sir Edmund Carlyle and James Carter, but the killer, Victor Langley, had been unmasked. Now, Poirot would weave the final threads of the mystery, laying bare the motives and methods that had turned a festive ball into a deadly stage. The guests, gathered under Inspector Japp's watchful eye, sat in tense silence. Lord Ashbourne, his peacock feathers long abandoned, slumped in a chair, his face etched with exhaustion. Madame Elise Duval, her crimson gown muted in the morning light, stood by a window, her lace mask gone, revealing eyes heavy with sorrow. Miss Clara Winthrop, her tiara askew, wept softly, her complicity in Victor's scheme exposed. Poirot raised a hand, his voice steady and resonant. "Mesdames et messieurs, the masquerade is over. Let us now unveil the truth, step by step, with the precision of the little grey cells." He began with Sir Edmund Carlyle, stabbed in the rose garden with a jewelled dagger. Sir Edmund was a man of wealth, but also of secrets. He held Lord Ashbourne in his debt, pressing for repayment of a failed shipping venture. The blackmail, letters found in the locked study, revealed his leverage. Not just money, but a scandal tied to Ashbourne's father, a betrayal over the fabled diadem. Poirot's gaze flicked to Ashbourne, who nodded weakly. Yet Sir Edmund's true danger lay in his past, a romance with Madame Duval, ended by his greed. Poirot turned to Madame Duval, her expression unreadable. The love letters in the library, signed E.D., Eleanor Duval, spoke of a love betrayed. Sir Edmund promised you the diadem, a symbol of your bond, but sold it for profit, leaving you ruined. Your argument with him before the waltz was not murderous rage, but pain. The verdigris on your glove came from handling an old brooch, not the dagger. Madame Duval's eyes glistened, but she remained silent, her dignity intact. He pivoted to Clara and Victor. "Mademoiselle Winthrop, you and Victor were entangled with Sir Edmund in a scheme to recover the diadem, believing it could settle your debts. Victor, posing as a gentleman, was no nobleman but a man of ambition, driven by greed. When Sir Edmund threatened to expose your plans, Victor struck, using the masquerade's chaos to lure him to the garden at midnight, as the love letters suggested. The jewelled dagger, taken from a display, was a deliberate choice, a symbol of betrayal. Poirot held up the note found on Carter's body. "You knew too much." James Carter, the footman, was no servant but Victor's accomplice, a hired man with a soldier's scars, tasked with watching Sir Edmund. When Carter grew greedy, demanding a share of the diadem's supposed wealth, Victor silenced him in the wine cellar with a second dagger. The chandelier's sabotage was a distraction, allowing Victor to lure Carter below while we were preoccupied. He'd addressed the impostor, Charles Langley, now unmasked as a minor conspirator. "You, monsieur, were a decoy, your tampered invitation a ruse to confuse. Your rough hands betrayed you, but you were not the killer, merely a pawn in Victor's game." Langley's shoulders slumped, his role exposed but his life spared. Poirot's voice softened as he addressed the curse. The Ashbourne diadem, spoken of by Professor Wren, was no myth but a catalyst. It drove Sir Edmund's greed, Victor's ambition, and Clara's desperation. The curse, if it exists, is not supernatural but human. The curse of avarice and betrayal. The hidden will naming Madame Duval was a red herring, a relic of Ashbourne's father's guilt, not a motive for murder. The guests sat stunned, their secrets laid bare. Clara's sobs broke the silence, her voice choked. I didn't know he'd kill. I only wanted freedom from debt. Ashbourne, his voice hoarse, added, I should have stopped Sir Edmund sooner. Madame Duval, with quiet dignity, murmured, Some wounds never heal, Monsieur Poirot, but I sought no vengeance. Poirot's gaze swept the room. The masquerade. It hides the face, but the heart betrays itself. Victor's mask was not of silk, but of lies, and his steps in this deadly dance have ended. As Japp's men led Victor away, the dawn's light grew stronger, illuminating the faces of the weary guests. The storm had passed, and with it the terror of the night. Poirot stepped to the window, reflecting on the human nature that drove such crimes. Greed, love, betrayal, all cloaked in the guise of festivity. The Twilight Masquerade was over, its secrets unveiled, and Ashbourne Hall would bear the scars of its truth. As the guests prepared to depart, their faces no longer hidden, Poirot adjusted his coat, his mind already turning to the next puzzle. For Hercule Poirot, the world was full of masks, but none could withstand the clarity of his little grey cells.